Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. John Kelly, Profiler here, and welcome. Welcome to part 11 of our very sad video series. Who killed Libby German and Abby Williams up in Delphi, Indiana? And today, I have to tell you, as soon as we got done with the video, we found out some research news and we realized that there's a very unique facial characteristic that we believe is going on with Bridge Guy. And we believe he has a bulbous nose. A bulbous nose is a nose that seemingly has a ball on the front. So he looks like he has a ball on the front of his nose. Now that's the way it's appearing to us. We thought this was very important. So we are kind of redoing the video a little bit to add this in, because if you add this facial characteristic into our short profile and our brainstorming, it may give us a really good idea on who Bridge Guy is. And a lot of people out there may know him, or at least someone may know him. And who knows? Law enforcement may certainly remember coming across him in the beginning of the investigation. They may have even interviewed him. A bulbous nose, let me say it correctly, a bulbous nose, okay, is a nose usually that is caused by rosacea, a reddening of the skin and around the body. And it looks like Bridge Guy didn't get a lot of treatment for this, if in fact he hasn't. I'm believing it's very possible he has it. And if he does, somebody definitely knows him. They know him for the bulbous nose, and they know him for having rosacea. So we want to add that into our shorter profile and our brainstorming session that went on in this video. I think you're really going to get something out of this, and let today be the day. Thank you so much, and on with the video. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. John Kelly, Profiler here, and welcome. Welcome to part 11 of a very, very sad case. This is the murder of Libby German and Abby Williams up around Delphi, Indiana. And, our hearts go out to the families and friends of Libby and Abby. And, the other thing I'm focused on, too, is sending our condolences out to the whole area, because it seems this whole area has been traumatized over these murders. And it's something you can't take lightly. Trauma can cause a lot of havoc with the mind. And in this specific instance, this has been going on over 2 years. And I'm sure it's affected a lot of people out there in a lot of different ways. And we understand this. We understand trauma. Trauma is like an earthquake. And when you get hit with an earthquake, what do you get? Usually you get aftershocks. So it's important for all of you out there to keep in mind some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And this is what it is. It's an anxiety disorder. And what you're running into is it could be inability to sleep, waking up in the middle of the night, nightmares, night terrors, not being able to eat, eating too much, going to substance, smoking too much, drinking too much, et cetera, to try and help you cope with and soothe this trauma that might be going on out there, because you possibly have a child killer in your midst, and I'm sure it's very upsetting to a lot of you, and some of you should probably be talking to somebody, some professional that can help you if you're incurring a lot of symptoms. With that being said, I want to say that everybody's innocent, proven guilty in a court of law, And today I want to introduce a couple of the members of our stock team. I am privileged to have worked under and to know Dr. Edward Mirsky. Dr. Edward Mirsky is a doctor of psychology. He is a PsyD doctor of psychology. I've had the honor of studying under him for probably 25 years. I've learned a lot from Dr. Eddie, as I call him. And also, I want to introduce retired detective commander, retired chief of detectives and commander, longest running commander of the Green River Task Force. And that would be a retired chief of detectives, Frank Adamson, who I have also had the privilege to work with for many, many, many years. And I've learned so much from these guys. It's not even funny. I can't even begin to tell you. They are, a big part of stock. They're the meat of stock. And between all of us, we come together as a team. We're going to try to do some profiling today, some short profiling, just to see exactly what we can come up with. This is not going to be a typical kind of profiling session. It's going to be more of a brainstorming kind of session with a little bit of what we know and what you know out there as a partial profile. Also, what we're going to be trying to do is having you join with us and maybe jog some memories. Again, you're the people that live out there. You're the people that know the other people out there. We are not familiar with them. And maybe through us all brainstorming together, we can jog a memory or two that will lead us in the direction of this killer and give us an idea on who this killer is. Frank, so what do you make out of all this? I know you've just recently started to research and study this. What do you actually make out of this? What kind of predator are we looking for here?
What I make out of it is that we have a person that committed this crime that's very familiar with the area. The historic trail is kind of isolated, and because it's isolated, I believe that whoever perpetrated these crimes knew that trail, knew it well. It's a long way from the trailhead to where the victims were essentially kidnapped. And what that makes me believe that probably that the perpetrator didn't start at the trailhead. He probably started closer to where he kidnapped. So he probably arrived there from a different area. I kind of got the feeling that he has to be an outdoorsman, probably a fisherman. He is probably a loner, and based on the fact that the girls were suspicious of him and were able to take this surreptitious video, I think that he displayed some strange actions, and the girls were able to pick up on that.
Frank, when you look at, you mentioned to me the other day him seeming to probably be odd in some way or fashion, and that's what alerted Libby. Libby, obviously, her instinct, if you will, went off. Her instincts went off, and Libby videoed him. So getting back to them running into him early on in the walk and getting a feeling that he was an odd kind of guy and maybe even to the point of being dangerous. I mean, because it looks like she didn't just outright video him. She videoed him in like a secret kind of fashion without him seeing. And, you know, what do you think about what is odd about him as you see him walking across that bridge? What grabs you to lead you to believe that he's odd?
Well, I think Libby intuited a danger. I think, you know, I think this guy was kind of a grubby guy. Even though, you know, you're out hiking and that kind of thing, he probably is a predator. And because he's a predator, she probably realized that he was paying too much attention to him. There was just something off base with regard to this individual.
Mhm. Okay, good. Ebby, yeah, Ebby. Dr. Eddie, I'm sorry, folks. Dr. Eddie, when we look at this fellow walking, right? There's two different camps on this. One camp says he's chewing and he's spitting, and the other camp says he's talking to himself. Now, we're also believing that Libby really believed there was something odd about him. Frank brought that up in the beginning the other day, that's why she was on high alert. So, if we have a guy walking and talking to himself, what could we possibly be looking at? Do you want to kind of go over the different scenarios, Dr. Eddie?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's not uncommon that people kind of talk to themselves, but it's usually done subvocally. Like if you ever watch somebody reading, their kind of lips are moving in a way and their throat's moving and, they're kind of processing things, but they're usually not talking out loud. If you're actually kind of in public area and you're talking out loud, um, you're probably, as we say, responding to some kind of internal stimuli. And it's probably some kind of a hallucinatory thing going on. And if
He's hearing voices, like he's hearing
yeah,
voices. Yeah.
could be, yeah, yes, if he's um, let's say responding to some kind of internal stimuli, which could be a voice, and he could be actually answering the voice. And that's a classic symptom, one of the main symptoms of schizophrenia. Um, like I said, if we do it subvocally, that's kind of in the normal range. It's usually done, non-consciously. Like I say, if you're reading a book, other people could see your throat moving, your lips moving, um, but you're not reading out loud. Um, so that could certainly draw attention. I'm sure many of our viewers would, if you go to a mall, inside a mall, it's not uncommon to see people walking around kind of talking to themselves. But they're talking out loud. So, and that will bring attention. That is very odd. Um, so I've even have clients now that I see, they may be not taking their meds regularly, and that could bring out some of these symptoms if they're, well controlled, with the medications and other types of therapy. Then that those symptoms tend to dissipate. Um, Now, how this has implications, maybe for this case, is that I know we mentioned in other sessions that for the law enforcement to look at certainly any people that are released from jail that have criminal records, with assaults and even rapes. You can even prior murders. You could be released after 10, 15 years. But my suggestion would be maybe look more toward any psychiatric um, cases that have come out of a hospital in the last, several months before that, because it sounds like he, could have a serious mental illness, probably schizophrenia, um, and anyone who might have been released in the last several months from state hospital, private hospital, most likely a state hospital. By the way he was dressed and other mannerisms, you would think he might not be in a private hospital. That usually requires very good insurance. Hate to say it, but that's the truth. Um, so I would maybe look along those lines. Who's been released with some kind of history of violence, especially against women, might be a good avenue to explore.
Yeah, so what we're looking at a situation where we have somebody that could be mentally ill and could possibly, be off their medication and acting odd in that way. Someone who's extremely familiar with the area, as you mentioned, Frank, and then also somebody who may not be mentally ill, but who may be just a focused sexual predator. Now, we know that focused sexual predators have some pretty decent organizational skills. And we know that usually paranoid schizophrenics who kill or mentally ill people that kill usually are unorganized. They don't have good organizational skills. So we have somebody that may be mentally ill, may not be mentally ill, somebody who may be a sexual predator, may not be a sexual predator. So what we're focusing on is the organizational skills. And I am not sure what we see here and how it fits. And I'd like to talk to Frank about that. Frank, do you see organized or unorganized here with this perpetrator?
I see actually both of them occurring. This guy is obviously organized in that he's there with a weapon. We don't know what the weapon is for sure, but he's there with a weapon. He's able to contain these girls. He orders them down the hill. The more I think about this, I think that the girls might have tried to escape down at the bottom of the hill, and that might be the reason that he murdered them in the manner that he did. And so I think at that point he'd lost his organization, and let me kind of explain that a little bit. Libby, who had the camera, if our suspect was aware of the camera, which he could have been, he totally forgets about it when he kills the girl, and he leaves that camera in her possession. And he must have, or phone, which we all know is a camera in these days. And I suspect that he kind of lost it at that point. So that shows the disorganization that I'm talking about.
Excellent. Okay. And when we're looking at this across the creek, see, this is something else that leads me to believe, that they made a break and ran for it. If they did run across that creek and he ran across that creek after them, an organized person probably would not have picked the creek to cross. Okay. Because there's too many things that could go wrong: slipping, sliding, freezing water, and try to keep control of two young girls. Also, which takes me back to a mentally ill person. Does he have that in his head to go to some destination? Or was that his destination of choice, across that creek for whatever reason, because the voices were telling him or whatever? So I have a whole problem. I have a whole problem with again the organized, disorganized piece. I'm probably leaning more to the organizational piece and him not being a paranoid schizophrenic, because we know from looking at the cases we've worked historically, usually people that are that severely mentally ill or paranoid schizophrenic killers usually aren't thinking about taking their victims to a certain place. They're just usually coming upon somebody and they're usually just killing them right then and there where they find them, whether it's shooting them coming out of a theater or it's pushing them onto the railroad tracks or, you know, like Frank, you mentioned earlier about that fellow in California. What was his name that ran around with a rifle and shot people to stop earthquakes? He felt if he was told by the voices that if he shot people and killed them, that would stop earthquakes in California. Do you remember his name?
Yeah, his last name was Mullins, and what he thought is by killing people, he would stop earthquakes from happening.
Yeah, I mean, this is, but there's no organizational usually. There's no organizational skills usually to these guys. I mean, it's the kind of helter skelter kind of guys. What say you about that, Dr. Eddie?
Well, the case that Frank mentioned, you mentioned that clearly that person was seriously mentally ill. Um, for many lay people, even some professionals, it may be so hard to believe that he had this delusional system and acted on it, but they really do believe. I mean, there's no doubt that he probably really did believe that by killing people that would prevent earthquakes. It sounds so, way out there, but we that's what we've experienced in my 35 years in the business. These people are not joking, they're not kidding, they're not exaggerating. They really, really believe what they say. So that's why we take it very, very seriously when people come to my office and may have a delusional system about their neighbor, about their boss, about their spouse. Could be about many, many things. We have to take it very, very seriously. I mean, there's a tendency to maybe even laugh about it or joke about it, but now we, take it very, very seriously. Um, Getting back to the organized, disorganized, I would agree with Frank. This case has components of both. It's really, you can look at some behaviors, conduct that was more organized, and there's some behaviors, conduct that was more disorganized. So I don't know if any crime is either 100% one or the other. Um, so within this one, I think straddles both organized and disorganized. So just because someone has a history of mental illness, that can fluctuate, depending on if they're on their meds and not on the meds, and they may not have taken their meds for a couple of days, and now they're, decompensating, but they're still functional, in a lot of ways. They still can, do well. He got to the bridge somewhere. Did he drive there? Did he walk there? Did he take a bus there? There's probably some organized way he got there. Um, he was dressed, maybe I don't know, a little bit oddly, but look at how did he walk? What was his gait like? Um, and you can even, how they look at his face, his eyes. Some people, it's been said when they're more in like a severe mentally ill phase, almost like their face changes and their eyes change. You can almost see what they call physiognomic. That's your facial expressions can look very odd and strange. Um, that's where we get these stories of werewolves and things, though full moon. Um, it's been said people actually change their appearance sometimes if there's a full moon. So,
What I want to get back to is with this guy being organized or disorganized, um, and looking at kind of, we're seeing six of one, half dozen of another here. And then, for argument's sake, if he was organized and he was leading the girls down the hill, the question is, where was he taking them down the hill? See, that's the thing that keeps coming back to me. What was this guy's final destination? I mean, in his fantasy, in his mind, what was he thinking? Where was his final destination? I mean, maybe across the creek was his final destination, but we know that usually when we're talking about organized individuals, we're talking about transportation. Now, we can say that by him, walking them and keeping control and walking them, a half mile, three-quarters of a mile away, that he was pretty much hurting them where he wanted them to go. But Frank, you mentioned something very interesting. There's a part of you that believes he may have had transportation on his mind, and he may have had a vehicle somewhere down there, below that hill somewhere. What are your thoughts there? A lot of people are thinking about the vehicle parked maybe a mile and a half out, 2 miles out, whatever it was. Maybe it was 3 miles. I'm not sure, but they mentioned a vehicle that was sitting out there, and the authorities want information on this vehicle. Not saying it was his vehicle, but they're alluding to it possibly could have been his vehicle. I have a problem with an organized kind of sex offender wanting to take his prey, if you will, these two girls, all the way back out, to a vehicle that's miles out there, versus having some kind of dwelling or vehicle closer to that area, to the down the hill area, in order to restrain them and then take them away in a vehicle. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And again, we're just brainstorming here, folks, and we'd like your input as always. And, we'd like your 2 cents on all this, but we have to, this is how brainstorming sessions go. We have to go over every angle, okay? Because if you're not working the angles are working you. So bear with us if some of this stuff doesn't meet your criteria. But Frank, what do you think about that? That is a possibility that he did have a vehicle or a dwelling somewhere closer that he wanted to get them into.
Yeah, my thought is that, number one, when he had the girls go down the hill, he was getting away from the trail, and so he's not going to be observed. I do believe that it's very possible that he had a vehicle down below, or that maybe he had some place to go down below that he'd been at before. The thing that struck me about this location is, although it's very remote, we're in basically a farming community, and it's rural. And when I was a young man, I worked in farms, and I worked baling and doing other things like that. And we often had itinerants come into our area. And I thought, it's possible that this guy wasn't from this particular area now, but that he'd been there in the past, maybe as a younger man or during some farming time, and so he was familiar with the area in this way. So I think, and I would probably believe, that the police have, looked beyond the community. It's possible the person's from the community, but it's also possible that the person's from a nearby community, or simply an itinerant person. So the possibility of having a vehicle, I think, is probable.
Okay, and we also had mentioned that he was a loner. I want to talk about him being a loner, and Dr. Mirsky, I want to defer to you on that just a minute. Dr. Mirsky, getting back to us believing that this guy is a loner, and obviously at this point we believe he was alone. Could there be an accomplice? Possibly. There's not a lot to work with on this case. We don't have a lot of information. We have hardly any information, but we're going to do the best we can with what we have and try and help out, the families of these deceased girls and the people at Delphi. But Eddie, what kind of personality goes into a loner? What's a loner's psyche like? I mean, I know that's probably a very broad question, but I mean, what can you say about that? What would you like to talk about there?
Well, if the person does have we call SMI, serious mental illness. Sometimes it's called a BBMI, biologically based mental illness. They definitely tend to be loners. They don't interact that well with many people. Even if they were in the hospital, which I've worked in during the years, they tend to be alone. I mean, like you said, I mentioned before, they have, if not well controlled with medication, then they have a lot of internal stimuli operating. I mean, there's many types of mental illness that are not as serious. We call them like a schizotypal or schizoaffective people, and they are, the people that almost everybody agrees they're pretty odd and strange. And even on some level, if they're not really seriously impaired, they know it themselves, that they know that they're, different and odd. They've been treated that way. And they would probably tend to kind of keep to themselves. Not that they have no interactions. We can think of a classic case, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Look at his social life and his personality. He his whole life he was pretty isolated and into himself, and he accomplished a lot. He got a PhD in math. He was a professor, and he, had some interactions. And as most of us know, he even in his mind he had a romantic affair with I think a lady in a post office, if I'm not
Library.
Library, yeah, okay. But it was more like in his fantasy. I don't think it was reciprocated.
Right.
But to the point where he wound up living alone in a cabin, and we know what happened after that. But
Very small cabin.
very small cabin, but made a lot of very sophisticated bombs, even with by lantern light. I guess there was certainly no electricity. Has a couple of candles, some lanterns. But he had a mission. He was called a mission serial killer. But if you look at his personality throughout his life, he was very much a loner. He very much kept to himself, very, very private. And we know there is a disorder called social anxiety disorder, SAD, which is not as serious. That's not a serious mental illness. And the latest research shows that about 20-25% of the population has social anxiety disorder to some degree. And it's actually biologically based. They have found the gene for it. So there's a clear genetic predisposition for that condition. And then we can, again, maybe some other time, do you treat it? Do you not treat it? For people who are very disturbed by being that way, yeah, I guess they have a right to come in and be treated. There's other people that say just let them be. They have this tendency to be very shy, and so what's so terrible about that? Let them be that way, and live their life. So that's the whole other issue right there. If it's treated, not treated, how do you treat it? So.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that the vast majority of people suffering from mental illness never even become violent, let alone become killers. Okay, so I think we need to put that out there too. But we do have some mentally ill killers. It's kind of like the vast majority of people that grow up in abusive childhoods will not become killers or serial killers or anything like that. But yet, when we look at serial killers, the vast majority of serial killers have been abused in childhood. So there's that small percentage that are out there stalking and killing. There's no question about it, and it's something we have to keep an eye on because I think it's getting ready to start to grow again. But that's a conversation for another time.
I wasn't hallucinating, thank God. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's Frank's cat, and obviously the cat wants attention, and when the cat wants attention, the cat's going to get some attention because the cat's not going to stop until it does get some attention. That's just the way it goes, I mean, they will not be denied. Okay, so that's a pretty cool looking cat you have there, Frank. You want to pick him up and show the audience?
Yeah, she's
You want to
in,
pick him up, pick her up, and show. Do you want to pick her up and show the audience?
okay.
I mean, this is one cool looking cat. Yeah, there you go. What's her name?
Her name's Lulu.
Hey, Lulu.
Lulu, okay.
Welcome to the team. Okay, we'll get you some credential down there.
We also call her Lucy and Lucifer.
Yeah, you'd have it both ways, I'm sure, right?
Organized, disorganized, yeah.
Yeah, organized and disorganized. So anyway, what I want to get back to is I want to get back to what Frank brought up a couple days ago with me when he said, listen, we don't have a lot of information. We don't have manner of death. We don't have motive. We don't have pictures at the crime scene. But let's take a look at what we do have. And Frank, being the great homicide detective he is, he brought some stuff out. First of all, Frank started off with a white male. That's something we pretty much can be assured of. That's what I believe anyway. I believe it's a white male. Frank brought out between 180, 200 pounds. Frank said probably about 5'8" to 5'10". Now, this is not new news for any of our viewers. They know this. But I think having it refreshed and us going over it has some value. Then we have, was this guy wearing a disguise? Was he not wearing a disguise? When he was walking, was he chewing and spitting and, just organized and focused on his targets? Or do we have somebody that was talking to themselves and seemingly odd that caused Libby to become very afraid, okay, to the point where she secretly took a picture? So then we have, somebody that's seemingly odd, age range, going by the FBI and the Indiana State Police's profile between 18 to 40, and that is current. That is current based on the superintendent's presser. That is current. He's between the ages of 18 and 40. All right. And then we have an odd person who is also a loner. We know there's been some homeless people around the area. You know, usually in February, they're off in shelters or in hospitals, they're not living outside. But who knows? Maybe he did get discharged, like you said, Eddie. Maybe he left the shelter. Maybe he's on his way somewhere. We do not know. But anyway, so we have an odd loner who's a white male between the ages of 18 and 40, 180 to 200 pounds, 5'8 to 5'10, who's extremely familiar with the area and killer, who's a killer of little girls. Okay. Now, do we believe this is his first time out in taking on two girls? Or do we feel he's done this before and he's just reoffending? Frank, what do you say about that?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I can think of alternative reasons that he may have killed this girl. It may be a revenge kind of thing. And if it's a revenge kind of thing, then it doesn't have to be a serial killer. Um, did he do it for sex? Did he do it for control? Probably, if he is a serial killer. The thing that struck me in this case is that, you know, one of the girls was very athletic, Libby, and you know, it just seems to be in that situation it would have been very difficult to control those two girls, and so the killing happened because they started to get away, and uh, for whatever reason he felt he couldn't allow that to happen. I don't know, but those are things that pop up in my mind. It's certainly possible that he's a repeat killer. If he is, he came from a different area because the police in this area aren't talking about, um, you know, similar crimes happening at the time. So, that to say that he's a serial killer would, in my mind, be speculation. Possible, we don't know.
Before I address our audience, is there anything else that we want to talk about today? This is not going to be the last time we are going to be getting together and brainstorming over Libby and Abby and Delphi. We will get together again. We have this case on the front burner, so we're going to focus on it. And we're going to be consistently going over it. And is there anything you want to say, Dr. Mirsky, before we break today? Is there anything else you want to add that you'd like the audience to think about?
The only thing, as we had talked about in our other sessions, is the law enforcement. It seems like they have reasons for withholding a lot of information, and I guess they have good reasons for withholding certain information. But just to throw it out there, how long will they still need to withhold certain information? When might they release that, or release part of it, all of it? And this, can defer to Frank too, what his thoughts are. And I'm sure they have very good reasons for withholding information. They usually do, but when a case starts to go cold like this one, it's been, 2 years now?
Little over 2, yeah.
Little over 2 years. So if there's no progress, if there's no significant tips coming in, if there's no movement in direction of solving it, then I guess historically there might be a tendency to release certain things to, we really have to, I guess, to rely on the public to come up with some significant tip, some information, jar someone's memory. Um, But I guess that's a question for the law enforcement. So
Absolutely, absolutely. But you make a good point about restimulating the investigation, and from what I understand, law enforcement is getting plenty of tips. I know they're getting enough tips from us too that are coming into stock. So it's an excellent question. And Frank, how would you answer that? Being, a chief homicide commander in retirement for, so many cases. You've just worked on so many homicide cases. How long do you think law enforcement should sit on it until they reveal a little more?
It kind of depends on the amount of information they have. I go back to the idea that I hope the DNA that they have is the suspects, but we don't know that. And oftentimes, law enforcement holds information because when they do narrow in on a suspect, they want to be sure that they've got the right person. I mean, it's kind of incomprehensible why anyone would commit this crime in the first place. These young girls, in the prime of their young life, physically active, bright. I mean, why would anyone do this? And so, law enforcement has a big responsibility in getting the perpetrator if they possibly can. And that may cause them, at least in certain circumstances, to hold some information back. I'm sure that they'll give out as much information as they can, and they'll keep giving it out if they have additional information in order to catch this human being that perpetrated these crimes.
And there you have it, right from the horse's mouth, so to say, because Frank Adamson had a case that he was the longest running commander of a very famous case, Green River Task Force. And, you guys on the Green River Task Force, you living and dead, all of you, deserve so much thanks for your hard work and the effort you put into that case. And it took 20 years, and it took, the refinement of DNA technology to catch Gary Ridgway. But you guys did it. You did it, and you saved a lot of lives in the meantime, because he certainly his killing cooled off considerably. With that being said, I'd just like to address the audience and thank you so much for brainstorming with us, and hopefully you'll be in on our next session. We don't know when that will be yet, but these brainstorming sessions usually are able to add just a little bit more to a possible profile that we can be putting together. But again, you have to understand there's not a whole lot of information out there for us to, put into a profile. There's a lot of hearsay out there. There's a lot of, hearsay, shall we say, possible information, but, the concrete information is, usually comes from law enforcement. It doesn't come from the street and hearsay and rumor control. However, we want any of your feedback. We can't thank you enough for watching. We can't thank you enough. I'm sorry, for your subscriptions. We can't thank you enough for all your input. Please continue. We love to hear from you. We'll always get back to you. We want you to make it a great day. And most importantly, stay safe out there. Thank you very much. Until next time, have a good one.